Yo, what is up, Kick and Bass crew? Today we have a special video for you. This is one I actually haven't done before, but I thought would be really helpful. So what I'm going to be talking about today is trends that I see in the tech house, techno kind of space, especially in more tech house, I would say. And these, I wouldn't call these like genres necessarily because they're all kind of derivative on house and tech house, and they're not, really like new genres, but they're just kind of like sounds that a couple artists and labels are pushing. And these are ones that I think in the next couple months, years, whatever, are going to be really big. As you guys know, in electronic music, kind of what's hot changes pretty quickly, same with other genres as well, like hip hop. And yeah, I think it's important as a producer to kind of know where the scene is going. And this is just my opinion. This is coming from my experience working with labels, working with other artists. What are other artists talking about? Like, who are the DJs they're looking at? Who are Spotify supporting a lot in their editorials? What's getting played a lot on the dance floor? This is all kind of from my industry background that I know because I do this full time, and I work as a DJ, and I see what other DJs are playing. And the idea here isn't to copy these trends and say, oh, I'm going to pick this and I'm going to, do something like this artist. It's more to either take inspiration and, if you're trying to get your music signed by a label and, it's not kind of fitting, or you're trying to be on certain labels, this video may be helpful to kind of figure out what they're digging and how to make that stuff. So I'm not going to be going in, it's not a tutorial on how to make all these sounds. I'm going to be showing you a few examples from these kind of genre buckets that I have identified, and showing you like some techniques just pretty broadly of how to do it. But yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So the first category we have is progressive, and I wouldn't call this progressive house because it's a bit different than if you're familiar with progressive house from maybe deadmau5 or like Eric Prydz or Christoph, or even like more traditional, like kind of loopy progressive house. It's a little bit different than that. It's more tech housey, it's more housey, but I have three different examples here. So the first one is a song that came out in 2020 from Eli Brown. It's called Pulling Me Back. So I'll just kind of skip through and play a couple sections for you. So immediately on the intro, you can hear that the bass line has this kind of melodic techno style bass, right? Like it's offbeat as opposed to a more groovy kind of tech house sound. There's also no clap, right? That's going to give a lot more of that techno-y kind of progressive influence, because the clap is going to change the beat and make it a little bit more housey. More kind of like that kind of vibe. And yeah, let's keep listening a little bit. So here's where that progressiveness comes in, right? Like things are being brought in very slowly. You hear this kind of plucky lead. So another thing you notice with the bass line, and you'll hear this a lot in the other examples as well, is that the bass line kind of follows a simple like 2 or 4 bar melody. So in this case, I think it's a 4 bar. Right? So, it starts with one note and then kind of like follows around. And that pluck is a lot like more present, a lot of automation on that pluck. And usually these tracks will have like a strong female vocal as well. So this is my friend Lovely. She's an awesome voice. And yeah, the lyrics are usually a little bit more like mysterious, like dark, like pulling me back in. They're not really as much lovey or joyful or housey. They have this more like nostalgic kind of trancey feeling to them. But yeah, that's one example of it. Here's another example. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this if you know John Summit's music. It's probably one of his biggest tracks, if not his biggest, Human. So let's listen to this one. And you'll hear a little bit of a different in style, but there's still a lot of similarities. So right off the bat, like the drum beat is definitely a lot more housey, tech housey. John's like known for his like percussion and it's kind of like top loop style beat, and it works really well here. So so this one's a little bit more like Latin percussive kind of beat, but the bass line, it's not as techno-y, but it still is less focus on the bass line, right? It's kind of like more subtle in the back. Boom, 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 boom. And again, it follows that same idea where it follows one note, and then in the drop, that melody of the bass will kind of come back. And listen a lot to like the ear candy and the synths. Very like lush, paddy kind of reverb effects. Reverse vocal swells. Again, like the synths are a lot more analog and kind of like lush, and they don't have that digital feeling to them. So a lot of reverb as well and like delays. Hear those kind of female vocals we were talking about. So the bass line is still kind of one note with the vocal kind of acting as a lead, and then you'll hear a change, I think, around here. This one, the Eli Brown example has like a pluck as the lead. In this track, the vocals kind of act like a lead in a more traditional like pop sense, and there's some really nice chords that are like dun 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 dun. You can hear those over here. But still has a lot of that like synthy arp that comes in the breakdowns. So yeah, this is like a second example. This one streamed really, really well on Spotify. Got a lot of support there, and yeah, these tracks aren't ones that you're hearing a lot of other DJs play, especially in like club sets, because a lot of times these kind of like breakdowns don't really work that great in a club, especially if it's a smaller club. It can get like a little like weird on the dance floor if there's like no beat. It really depends, but they're definitely standout tracks for the artists themselves, and some DJs are definitely playing them, and has a lot of remix opportunities as well. Third example are these guys Mauer from the UK. They had like a really big collab with Solardo, and they have like a super distinctive style, kind of similar to the Eli Brown one, I would say, more than this Human example. If you know Will Easton, it's a very similar sample, but it's all kind of about like having this synth lead. But let me play this track for you guys. Again, the drums here are a little bit more techno and no clap, right? We wanted to focus on the kick a little bit more. The bass line's more like this pulling me back one. Very progressive though, it's still kind of teasing in that synth. So there's the lead. So here you can hear that lead really come in, and the drums kind of fully come in with the bass here. If you're trying to make this style, like a key way to kind of make these lead sounds, I don't know if there's a name for this, but it's all about kind of like having a root note that kind of goes back to, and I'm just drawing random notes here, but like your pattern will look a little bit like this or something, where it's like da 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 da. So you can play around with something like this to get those leads, and delete notes that you don't like, and change the timing on some of them, like move them over. But that's kind of like how you get that style, and you kind of find a good loop, and you have to add a lot of automation to it. So you'll hear that the filters are always opening, and the release time on the synth is changing. Hear it like opening up. There's that bass line moving up and down as well. Some nice like pads come in. But yeah, these are, I think, 3 great like kind of examples of this genre. And if it's something that you're into, if I'm a big fan of combining genres and combining styles. So even if you just take one idea from here, like the lead, and you try to make a lead like that work in a style that you're already working on and kind of trying to develop your sound in, that's a really great way to kind of change it up and create something completely new. Or maybe it's the idea of like not having the clap always in, or having that bass line change around. Like there's a bunch of different things you can take from it. It's not to, recreate all of them and make a sound that sounds exactly like this. But yeah, that's the first kind of genre I wanted to talk about. The second one is going to be this kind of Latin tech house, minimal tech house. This one's really, really big right now, especially in the club scene. Lots and lots of DJs are playing stuff like this. Fisher is, Chris Lake is, Clooney's, like whole labels kind of like this style. Sid as well, a lot of his productions have this kind of trend. Latin house is really big, but there's this kind of like Latin minimal that is, especially like Michael Beebe, he kind of like started this a little bit with Solid Grooves, like championing this. Dennis Cruz, Eddie M. The list goes on, but yeah, this style is going to be really big over the next few years, especially the more underground scene. And I see it doing really well on Beatport, and a lot of artists, kind of new artists are making this. So let's go over what this kind of sounds like. So I have an example. This is Clooney's new label. He just did a compilation with like 10 tracks or something. They all like charted super high in Beatport. Really good, lots of DJ support. So let's listen to this. Oh, I think I still have this one on. Yeah. So immediately you can tell the drums are extremely snappy and short. That's very key for this style, right? So if you're going to be using loops here, I would recommend, whatever loop you have, let's pretend this is like a top loop, right? If this is your top loop, you want to hit beats mode, change this arrow to the right, and bring this down, because what that's going to do is it's going to keep the transient of your sound, because we have the transient preserve, but it's going to get rid of all that the decay and sustain on it. So if I resample this, see how everything's nice and tight and short now? That's kind of the key to the drums for these kind of tracks. You want it to be snappy and short, and very kind of percussive. Like the hat never gets like super long and open, because it's supposed to kind of give that tight, dirty feeling. Another important thing is like the bass line, really subby, really groovy, like not like a rolling bass line with lots of mids. It's all kind of about having like a knock or like an 808 style sub hit. So this just sounds like a sine wave pretty much, and it's kind of short little loop, 1 bar, 2 bar, repeats itself. It's supposed to be pretty repetitive, the style. Let's listen a little bit more.
Mami dale para abajo, hasta abajo, para abajo, hasta abajo, hasta abajo, hasta abajo, hasta abajo. Mami dale para abajo, hasta abajo, para abajo, hasta abajo, hasta abajo, hasta abajo, hasta abajo. Ella le da cintura, 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 dale, dale, dale. Ella le da cintura, 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 dale, dale, dale. Ella le da cintura, 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 dale, dale. Ella le da cintura, 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 dale, dale, dale. Ella le da cintura.
So the build up, right? It's not super in your face. It's way more minimal. It's kind of just like isolating a vocal, maybe like one clean reverse crash or white sweep effect, and then it drops right back in. But because you didn't have any of the drums, you had no bass, nothing. Like when that comes back in, it hits super hard. The other thing you want to notice here is like the vocals are very loopy, very also like percussive, I would call the vocals. Like a lot of times in this style, you'll hear sounds that aren't even like words. They're just kind of like noises. Like Clooney has a track called, I'm forgetting the name right now, but it's like tak 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 tak. Like that's literally the vocal. It's like taki taki tak, and that kind of like more of like la 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 da 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 as opposed to like words and lyrics is pretty popular with this genre. Other thing is like there's really no synths. Like you'll hear maybe some sampled stuff like instruments like horns or guitars and stuff, or and the vocal, or maybe some percussive glitchy synths, but you're not gonna hear like lots of pads or stabs or like acid leads or anything like that. It's supposed to be about like the groove and more like Latin percussive feel. Like more bongos, percussive stuff. A lot of vocal chops as opposed to synths, right? So yeah, the idea here is subtle build-ups, short, sweet drums, kind of short phrase on your bass line, and don't use too many synths because the synths are just not, that isn't to say don't use synths. You can definitely use synths in this genre, but the way you use it is important. It's supposed to be more minimal, stripped back. So you can use like shorter decay times and sustain times on those synths. And it's less about using the synths with the call and response, in my opinion. Here's one more example. Sosa, he's got a label as well, which is kind of doing the sound similar to Hellbent. I think it's called Coco. Yeah, let's listen here. This one just came out, I think. Build up, same thing, really stripped down. So this one, it kind of has like a sample as like the lead, like a flute sound, but gives it that kind of tribally feeling, kind of similar to this. Same thing with the vocal here. This is what I was talking about. Like it's less like words. It's more of like a little catchy loop, like la la la, la 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 la. No words there, right? This one's a little more progressive in the sense like you get a bigger hi-hat come in. There's a couple different bass lines too, which I like. There's like a sub bass line and then some other kind of UK more style. Also, like the snares here provide a lot of the groove. Kind of like Disclosure. So this is like a more UK garage kind of style. But that's the cool thing, is that you can kind of use some of these techniques and combine them with other genres. So his is more like UK bass kind of influenced, garage, while like Sid's is a little more tech house, and like the Clooney stuff is a little bit more like Marco Corolla or like Solid Grooves style. But yeah, this genre, really big right now, really hot. Labels like this a lot, like Repopulate Mars, Catch and Release, Black Book, Chris Lake's label, Jamie Jones, Hot Creations. Like everyone's kind of looking at this, and it's definitely like the big sound in clubby tech house. Like kind of moved away from the more rolling bass line, and yeah, people want a more like sophisticated kind of sound. So yeah, this one's really big. And the last one that I think is going to be super big, I've been playing this a lot in my sets, is this kind of like ravey techno, but not really techno sound. So I have two examples here, one from Disc Freak and one from Adapter, which is also on Catch and Release. And this is the kind of stuff that you're going to hear maybe in the clubs. Yeah, definitely in the clubs, but way more on the main stage. So like if you're going to look at like Fisher or someone else playing a really big stage, this is the kind of stuff you're gonna hear late night, or like a warehouse. And yeah, it has like a lot of rave influence, a lot of techno influence, but it's not techno. It's definitely still more housey. So yeah, let me show you guys these examples. So This Freak are an Irish duo, I believe. A lot of people are playing their music. John, Patrick Topping's been supporting. Solomon just like picked up their track for the label, or for his label. So let's listen. So right off the bat, you can tell the drums are a lot bigger, right? They have that kind of loose, ravey 909 open hi-hat in it. And you get a lot more ravey with the synths. So you have this acid synth. And like the bass line is not really too subby. It has a lot of mids in it because you'll hear later in the drop that bass is really going to fill out a lot of the tracks. So let's listen to the build up. So here the emphasis is a lot more on the kick of the track. So the bass is still very present, but because you don't have the clap in the drops, kind of like techno, like you don't really hear a clap, it's more like a kick, boom, 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 right? So it's kind of taking that influence, but it's not as fast. It's definitely more stylistically this kind of like tech house sound, but it has that very kind of like fist pumpy sound. And you know, the This Freak are really good with like looping vocals like this, but it's kind of like this weird pitchy, old school vocal, kind of like rave call. Here comes the hats. You can hear that bass line has so much mids in it. It's not like very rolling or subby. Then the clap comes in a little bit later in the drop, also with some acid synths. Cool. So yeah, that's another example. If you go to This Freak Spotify, they have a bunch of songs. This is kind of their style. But yeah, I think this is gonna be really, really big. Patrick Topping's been supporting this a lot with his label Trick. If you listen to Trick, kind of has this old school ravey sound. Like Ben Hemsley's another guy that similar, a little bit different, but similar. And Adapter is a great example. This one was like really, I think it was like top 3 on Beatport. This Fisher signed this to his label. So let's listen to this example. Immediately, same thing with the drums, right? Really big kind of open hi-hats here. So the bass line's a little bit more subby here, but because there's that constant chord hits, right? Dun, 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 it really fills out the mids. And you kind of have that dirty kind of sawtooth bass right here. So the key here with the synths is that they all kind of have a classic feel to them, right? They're not very digital sounding. They all have like this kind of like detune. So almost if you were to take two, I'll show you guys really quickly. Let's say you were to take 2 oscillators. You can do this with digital synths, but the idea is you don't want it to sound perfect. So if we start to detune one of these from the other, because of the way that the waves are working, the phase of the waves is off. They're slightly different frequencies. It's going to create that like phaser almost sound. You add a couple voices. Right, so you kind of, this is like what you want to be looking for in the patches, if you're going to be doing this style. Let's go back. A little bigger build-ups in this genre as well. Snare roll, risers. So again, this track is a little less techno-y because like it kind of has the full drums from the start, but there's always a big emphasis on the kick, and the kick sample itself is gonna have a lot of like knock and top end to it. So yeah, the way it's processed and the way that it's everything else is kind of sidechained to the kick, so it's very noticeable. Like, if, listen again. And the clap is not really bright; it's more of like this kind of muted sound. Like the clap is like right in this area, like 700 to you don't really hear it much up here. A little bit right there, that's when it starts to come in. So you can kind of like use this technique with an EQ to see where your clap should be hitting and make your own EQ adjustments on that as well. But yeah, the adapters kind of use this style a lot, and I see it getting really big. And yeah, this ravey techno style is it's definitely not going anywhere. I think people have a desire to kind of go back to the old school a little bit, so this is a kind of nice happy medium that gives it a little bit more ravey, but it's still, the arrangement is very tech housey, and the sample selection is very tech housey as well. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a little bit different. It's not focused on production techniques, but hopefully you can watch it and rewatch it, and maybe pull up a couple things. And if you haven't already, you should watch our first episode of the Kick and Bass podcast about finding your sound, because this is all about what you want your sound as an artist to be like. And that isn't to say you have to pick one thing and just do that, but these are definitely some genres that I think are going to be really big over the next couple months, and might be useful if you're trying to get music signed, or you're trying to stay up to date with what's hot kind of in the house world, to at least play around with some of this stuff. So I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys for the next video. Peace.